The first time Mara heard the house breathe, she thought it was the wind. Old porches sigh, wooden ribs expand and shrink. The past leaks through cracks when the weather changes. But this breath was different. Slow, steady, almost human, rising from the floorboards and curling through the hall like a memory that had learned to exhale. She stood in the foyer, one hand on the banister, staring up at the stained glass transom where raindrops stitched silver stitches across the evening. Her father used to say the house kept the weather better than any diary. When it remembers rain, he'd whisper, it remembers everything. Mara had returned only because the letter had insisted. Her father's handwriting, careful, patient, with the old habit of crossing his TAS twice, had asked her to come home before the last storm. He'd been gone 3 months, carried away by a quiet illness and a louder silence between them that had lasted years. She couldn't forgive him for what he hadn't said the night her mother died. He couldn't forgive himself for the time he had not turned back. 2 stubborn clocks, both set wrong, insisting they were right. Now the house was hers. 3 stories and a century of dust. The attic full of trunks, the cellar full of jars, the kitchen full of ghosts. She slept the first night on a mattress on the floor in the old sewing room because the bed her parents shared still smelled like their lavender and arguments. At 2:17 a.m., as the rain thickened to a soft roar, the house breathed again. With the breath came a whisper. Mara. She turned, heart kicking. The whisper wasn't a voice. It was something threaded through the creak of a step, the thrum of water in copper pipes, the tick of the hallway clock. She pressed her palm flat to the wall. The plaster was warm. "Who's there?" she asked, because it felt safer than asking, "What are you?" The answer was not a word. It was a pull, a leaning in the light, a suggestion. The suggestion led her down the back staircase, the one nobody used after the kitchen was remodeled, and the wallpaper with strawberries was covered by paint the color of fog. The steps counted themselves in her bones. In the pantry behind rows of spices like tiny time capsules, she found a hairline gap in the wainscoting. On the 3rd try, her fingers found a notch. The panel clicked. The wall opened like an inhale. A narrow tunnel sloped downward into cool cedar breath. Her phone's flashlight skated across labeled shelves. Photographs in acid-free sleeves, old report cards, brittle valentines. Her father had been a collector of ordinary days. At the end of the tunnel, a small room waited with a single object on a pedestal, a pocket watch as big as a heart, its glass face crazed with hairline fractures, its second hand ticking backward. Mara reached out and lifted it. The metal hummed like something alive. The watch gave a soft shiver, the kind a bird gives when it tucks its beak under its wing. Something inside the case clicked once, twice, and the room tilted. She was in the kitchen. Not the fog-colored one, but the strawberry one. Sun caught in the curtains. Late morning, and she could smell cinnamon. Her mother stood at the stove, stirring a pot with a wooden spoon, her hair still damp from a shower, her shoulders bare under a cotton robe printed with tiny yellow moons. Mara had been 6 the last time she'd seen this robe. She had cried when it disappeared into a donation box. "Mara, sweetheart, grab bowls," her mother said without turning, and in that exact voice, that easy smile threaded through words. The pain in Mara's chest dissolved into a tidal wave. She opened her mouth and then closed it, afraid to let sound out in case the world shattered. She set bowls on the counter with shaking hands. What day is it?" she asked, and immediately bit her lip. What a ridiculous question to bring to a kitchen. Her mother laughed. "Tuesday," she said. "Rain day. Your favorite." She glanced up and frowned at Mara's face, older by decades and older by hardness. "You okay?" Mara swallowed. The second hand in the watch kept ticking backward against her palm. The scene blurred. The room turned. The watch breathed her forward, no, backward, into a living room with boxes piled high. Her father, younger by 20 years, sat cross-legged on the floor with a stack of records and a look on his face like someone learning to read again. "We don't have to rush," he was saying to nobody, or maybe to everyone he loved. "We can take a long time packing. We can take forever." Then he laughed, and she remembered. The week they almost moved, then didn't. The week her mother had changed her mind because the house had remembered rain, and she couldn't leave yet. That week had been a hinge the whole family swung on for years. Again the room pivoted, the house moving her like a hand on a chessboard. The watch weighed more now. In the hallway she saw herself at 13, stomping up the stairs, screaming, "You never listen!" She saw her father in the doorway, torn between anger and aching, choosing anger because it offered more armor. A decade later, she saw herself packing a car, saying, "Don't expect me back," and her father saying nothing. The house was merciless. Time is when it tells the truth. When the watch lifted her back to the pantry tunnel, the rain had thickened to a curtain. She braced herself against the shelf and slid to the floor, heart rattling. The watch, still ticking backward, rested in her lap like a question. "What are you?" she asked again, but softer. The house breathed, the light leaned, and suddenly she knew. Her father had built this room, this tunnel, this shrine of ordinary days. The watch was not a toy or a trick. It was a machine he had inherited from his mother and taught himself to repair in the hours when grief complicated to routine. Not a time machine exactly, not a door, a needle, something that could stitch her into earlier cloth long enough to feel the old weather. She slept that night with the watch under her pillow like a secret. At 2:17 a.m., when the house remembered rain again, she made a choice. She would not return just to witness. She would return to listen. The next journey took her to the hallway outside her parents' bedroom on a late autumn afternoon. The door was cracked. Her father's voice, low and hushed, slipped into the hall like something delicate fleeing a jar. "I should have turned around," he said. "I should have come back for her." "You were 22, her mother said gently. "You were terrified of grief and gas stations." "I left my sister alone," he said. "I keep thinking there was a minute, 1 minute, when I could have chosen differently." Mara knew this story. Her father's sister, 19, who'd have phoned from a broken payphone somewhere between their small town and the college she wanted, and the boy she didn't tee. She'd said she was out of money for gas. He'd told her to keep driving and he'd wire it. A truck didn't see her at the next intersection. The minute he hadn't turned back lasted the rest of his life. Mara pressed her forehead to the wallpaper. She could say it now, through a door that belonged to the past. "I forgive you," she whispered. But the house was a needle, not a pen. It could stitch her into cloth, but it could not edit the pattern. Still, the saying stitched her. She felt something loosen in the ribs where she'd held herself too tightly for too long. On the fourth night, she asked the watch for a day she had never seen but had always carried. The morning her mother didn't wake up. The watch vibrated like a no. She held it tight. "Please," she said, and the house breathed an answer she didn't understand until the room spun and the kitchen filled with late-night jazz and 2 wine glasses, and her parents laughing about the way people change in Don T. Her mother looked so alive that grief became gratitude for a minute. The needle had chosen its own seam. Days passed in a strange new rhythm. She fixed hinges, swept steps, returned to the tunnel to fold herself into rain and laughter and fights and apricot jam. The house seemed grateful. The watch warmed to her skin like a sleeping animal. Sometimes she felt her father's presence near the pantry door like an apology trying to get itself said. Sometimes she felt her mother's hands in the curtains, tugging them open just enough to let morning in. It was after a week of weather that the house changed the rules. The breath came early, 1:58 a.m., and the pull was urgent, more current than suggestion. The watch pulsed hard enough to sting. The tunnel sloped steeper than before. In the room with the pedestal, the stone floor shivered. Fine white dust slid like snow. The watch's second hand hiccuped, paused, and then pushed on, backward towards 0. "No," Mara said. "No, no, don't break." She had not known she loved it until she felt it failing. The house whispered her name the way people pray. She lifted the watch and the room split. She stood in a hospital corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed. A coffee machine did the small hot work that keeps grief upright. Her father sat in a chair with his head in his hands. The date on the clock said years ago, but also now. Mara walked toward him, forgetting the rules, forgetting her promise to listen, not touch. He looked up. For the first time since she had entered the house's cloth, someone looked at her, not through. "Mara?" he said. She stopped breathing. "You can see me?" He rubbed his face with both hands. "Maybe I can't. Maybe I've broken too." He tried to smile and made a sound instead. "I wrote you the letter," he said, as if starting where conversation had last been laid down. "Asked you to come before the last storm. I wanted to show you what the house can do. I wanted to tell you what I never said." "What didn't you say?" Her voice was a glass of water on a shaking table. "That I was cruel," he said simply. "That I chose anger when I meant I'm afraid. That I set my clocks by grief and then blamed everyone for being late." Mara sank into the chair beside him. "Why can you see me now?" His eyes flicked to her hand. "Because you brought the watch to the day it was made to break." The hallway tilted. "What?" He swallowed. "Everything that works must one day stop. That's how it keeps meaning. The watch. It's gotten you home. It needs you to let it be finished." "No," she said, child quick. "I can fix it. You fixed it." "I only learned to listen to it," he said. "It doesn't want to be forever. Nothing does. Not if it wants to be loved. It wants to be enough." The machine in the corner hissed. A nurse passed and didn't see them. For a moment the corridor seemed to be made of rain. "I forgive you," Mara said out loud, to his face that was younger but already old. "I forgave you in the hallway, years ago. You didn't hear it because you weren't there. I forgive you now so you can hear it." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were clear, not fixed, not unbroken, just honest. "Thank you," he said, and it sounded like a door unlocking in the center of a house where someone had been locked in too long. The watch pulsed hard, a heartbeat miscounting. "I have to go," she said. "I know," he said. "Take the rain with you." The corridor dissolved. In the tunnel, dust fell in a quiet applause. Cracks needling the room's corners lengthened. The house steadied against itself. The watch grew very heavy. Mara set it on the pedestal. Its second hand fought backward for 5 brave ticks, then stopped between numbers as if choosing a last word. She bent and kissed the glass. "Thank you," she whispered to the machine. But she meant the house, and she meant her parents, and she meant time itself for letting her carry what could not be corrected. Upstairs the rain slowed to a memory. The hallway clock, which had always been 5 minutes wrong, sighed into the right time with the self-satisfaction of an old cat settling into the good chair. Morning found her in the kitchen, making coffee, humming a song her mother used to finish with a note that sounded like the first day of vacation. She called her daughter before sunrise and told her to bring the kids over after school. "We'll look at the trunks in the attic," she said. "I think the house has stories for them." At 2:17 p.m., just because it felt right to visit the hour when the house had first remembered rain, she went to the pantry and opened the panel. The tunnel smelled clean. The pedestal was empty. On the floor lay a small silver screw, the kind you would never notice unless you were looking for the last thing a heart leaves behind. Mara picked it up and put it in her pocket. That evening, the sky turned the color of quilts. Her grandchildren ran around the porch with jars, catching fireflies like tiny borrowed stars. Her daughter leaned against the rail, watching with that expression that holds pride and exhaustion in the same pair of hands. Mara told them all how the house used to sound in storms, how the old wallpaper wore strawberries because life had been poorer. But sweeter then, how her father collected report cards like other men collected coins. Somewhere between the story about the almost move and the one about the day the dog ate a birthday cake and got away with it because it was the dog's birthday, Mara felt her chest ache the way ribs ache after you laugh too hard. It took her a second to realize. That's what healing is. It hurts where joy has been working. When everyone had gone home and the house had finished counting the dishes and shutting the lights, Mara went out to the porch steps with a blanket and the silver screw in her pocket. The stars were expanding into night like towns into countries. She closed her eyes and said an old prayer to nobody in particular. The house breathed in. The house breathed out. The weather inside her steadied. Later, when the next storm finally arrived, the rain passed softly through the oak leaves and rattled the gutters with the sound of loose change. Mara woke at 2:17 a.m., not because the house asked her to, but because her body had learned the habit of remembering. She padded barefoot to the pantry and stood with her hand on the panel, not opening it, just greeting the place where the tunnel had taught her how to hold a day without owning it. "Good night," she said to the wood. "Good night," the wood said back in the gentle language of old things. Years after Mara was gone, her granddaughter would move into the house with a job that involved telling stories about people who had been told for too long they were ordinary. She would find the tunnel without looking and the pedestal without needing a map. There would be no watch, only a faint circle where weight had once rested and the sense that something had been well used and was done. In the pantry's wainscoting, tucked into the notch of the secret panel, she would find a small silver screw. She would put it in her pocket without knowing why it made her want to call her mother and ask about the recipe for apricot jam. On certain rainy nights, if she stood very still in the foyer and let the house count her heart, she would hear a breath that was not wind. She would feel a leaning in the light as if a suggestion had walked into the room and was about to say a name she already knew. In every family there is a person who learns the language of the house. It was her turn to listen. Time is not a river only. It is also a house, rooms added, doors sealed, staircases that make no sense until you climbed them enough to know where grief creaks and where joy hums. Some houses remember storms. The best ones remember you back. If you're lucky, they teach you what Mara learned in the pantry and the tunnel and the hospital corridor where forgiveness arrived late, but right on time. Nothing wants to last forever. Everything wants to be enough. On the last morning of a long life, when the sky wore rain soberly like a good coat, Mara's daughter found a note taped to the hallway clock. It was in Mara's handwriting, brisk, unsentimental. The loop of the Y in joy a little larger than the others. When it remembers rain, listen. When it's clear, let it be clear. If you find a small silver thing, keep it in your pocket. It will remind you not to fix what isn't broken, and not to keep what's finished from finishing. The clock ticked the right time. The house breathed. The family stayed. Somewhere beyond the way weather wraps itself around wood, a watch that once ticked backward lay still. It had been loved as far as it was meant to go. It had been enough.